The Orange County housing market is finally starting to shift in favor of buyers. With rising inventory, price reductions, and homes being pulled from the market, we may be seeing a market that's way more in favor of buyers than sellers. In today's video, we're going to take a look at what is currently happening with inventory, what's happening with buyer demand. We're also going to talk about what I'm seeing out there with current pricing, as well as what buyers and sellers are doing with regard to compensation, so that if you're a buyer or seller in today's Orange County housing market, you can make the best decision in order to set yourself up for success. The active listing inventory increased by just over 1% in the last 2 weeks and now sits at just under 37 active homes on the market. Now that includes single families, townhomes, and condos. And the key thing to note here is that inventory is still increasing, with 323 more active sellers coming to the market this September than last year at the same time. And now this is a bit unusual, as we really have a seasonal pattern when it comes to real estate here in Orange County. Typically we see the most amount of homes come to the market in the early spring, and then it starts to die off towards the end of the summer, which is usually when we see that peak. But this year, inventory is continuing to rise into October, with active listings up 53% year over year. Now, when I talk about numbers like this, I think it's always important to understand the context of what's going on. Yes, inventory is up year over year, but it's still down considerably when you compare it to that 2017 to 2019 average, as that time would have us sitting just over 6,300 homes. Now, when interest rates were low and buyer demand was super high, that statement actually meant a little bit more than it does today. Now, even though inventory is considerably less than it was from 2017 to 2019, the reality is the housing market is still slowing down. And as we all know, one of the primary drivers behind this slowdown in the housing market, allowing inventory to continue increasing, is mortgage rates, as interest rates have increased nearly 0.5% in just over the last couple of weeks. In fact, we saw mortgage rates hit the lowest level that we saw in nearly 2 years, and within a few days, we saw mortgage rates shoot back up to the highest level that we'd seen in nearly 2 months. And the reason for that is better than expected news. Not only did we see inflation come in a little bit higher than expectation, but we saw the jobs market come in with a gangbuster report, which is leading a lot of people out there to believe that a soft landing is actually in the card, and that the Fed might not have to drop the federal funds rate quite as aggressively as they had initially thought. And because of this news, we saw the 10-year shoot up, followed by rates on the 30-year fixed. In fact, when we look at buyer demand here in Orange County, it was sitting at the highest level that we had seen since July. And a large part of that was due to interest rates coming back down. It spurred buyer demand out there in the market. We had people that were on the fence, and once interest rates came down, improved affordability just enough, they were able to jump back in the market. But here's the thing, that jump in buyer demand is actually going to be short-lived, as not only are we dealing with higher mortgage rates, we're also dealing with the slowest time of the year when it comes to selling real estate in Orange County. And that's exactly why I believe as a buyer right now, you have the best opportunity to buy a house in Orange County than you've had in probably the last 4 years. Yes, I realize mortgage rates last year about this time were hitting 8%, but we also had 53% less inventory on the market at that time, which means a lot of buyers last year couldn't find the right home they wanted to buy, even if they were in a position to buy it. And on top of that, you had a lot of competition on the homes that were priced correctly, which meant it was very, very tough to get your offer accepted. But since then, we've actually seen the market moderate considerably, with 34% of the active listings on the market at the moment having some sort of price reduction. If I were a buyer out there in the current market, that's where I'd be focusing all my attention. Because if you're a seller that has to sell your property, then unfortunately you have to deal with the current buyer demand that's out there, which means you might have to lower your price. You might have to take an offer less than you had originally thought. Because what we're seeing is those sellers that don't have to sell, they're actually pulling their homes off the market. At the moment, 21% more homes have been pulled off the market compared to last year. And with that, we've actually seen a 79% increase in September alone. And that's because a lot of sellers know that we're moving into that slow season where there's just less buyer demand out there. We have high mortgage rates, and there's just going to be less activity out there in the market. And for those sellers that don't have to sell, the easiest thing to do is pull their home off the market and potentially wait for a better opportunity. But on the flip side, those homes that are currently sitting on the market right now, those that have been sitting on the market with days adding up and you're starting to see price reductions, in my opinion, that's where the opportunity lies. Now, yes, I realize that mortgage rates are higher, which means your mortgage payment's higher. All of those things that are associated with your mortgage are higher. But here's the thing, mortgage rates are going to continue to come down. And as that happens, not only is it going to add more buyer demand to the market, it's going going to give you an opportunity to refinance and take advantage of that lower rate, assuming you still qualify to do so. Now, many of you know I purchased a home last November when interest rates were near the highs. In fact, I took a 7-year ARM just so I could get a slightly better interest rate. Here's the thing, I didn't like that payment at the time, but I knew that mortgage rates were likely to come down. In fact, I've refinanced 2 times over the last year, and with that, it's dropped my mortgage payment over $800. Now, yes, I could have waited to buy that home now, but understand, there's a home with a very similar floor plan in my neighborhood at the moment that's listed considerably higher than where I purchased my home. So yes, I could have waited and taken advantage of a lower mortgage rate, but the reality is I would have been paying a higher price for that home. So instead, what I did is I locked in my price and I was able to refinance and lower my payment over time. Now, I realize for some people, you're not going to have that option, right? You don't have the option to buy right now. Your only option is to sit on the sidelines and wait for things to improve, and that's completely okay. Renting is actually buying you patience until you're ready to buy a home. So don't beat yourself up because you can't qualify at the moment, but start putting yourself in the best position possible by working on your credit, working on your down payment, and getting pre-approved so that when the opportunity does present itself, you're ready to take advantage of it. Now, because inventory is rising and buyer demand is dropping and we're starting to see some price reductions, we're seeing the days on the market actually go up. We're currently sitting around 70 days for the average home to go under contract. Now, that's not for it to close, that's for it to go under contract, which means the average home sits on the market just over 2 months before ever receiving an offer. But something to keep in mind here, that doesn't mean every single house is like that. I often talk to buyers where they see a home that hasn't sold in 5 days and they immediately think that the seller's going to take some huge price cut or that we're going to go in and be able to lowball the offer. And in some cases, maybe that works, but the reality is most sellers aren't willing to consider a big price reduction until the home's been on the market for at least 30 days, if not more. But here's the key. It's always really important as a buyer to have your agent try to figure out what the seller motivation is. If you can figure out why the seller needs to sell, then there could be a possibility for you to come and take advantage of that. But just because a home's not selling in the first weekend doesn't mean it's overpriced, and it also doesn't mean they're willing to take a big haircut. So instead of just making up a number that you want to pay, look at what the comparable sales have been doing in the market. Try to find something that's been recent in that neighborhood with similar bedrooms, bathrooms, lot size, upgrades, all of that stuff, and figure out where it was initially priced, how many days it took it to sell, and what it actually sold at. Because that's a really good indicator of where the house you're likely looking at is probably going to sell. Because if I'm being honest at the moment, the homes that are priced correctly aren't seeing huge price cuts. They're not sitting on the market forever. In fact, they're still selling, especially when they're priced under $1.5 million. And that's because that's where the large majority of buyer demand currently sits. But at the same time, I am seeing some sellers out there shoot for the moon, just overpricing to start with. And in fact, when I go look at where the comps are, the comps don't even support the number that they're coming up with. So sometimes they're just making up these numbers. Sometimes maybe they have a number in their head that they need to walk away with a certain amount in order to sell. But in my opinion, those aren't serious sellers. And that's why it's always really important to figure out the motivation. But like I said, this is the best opportunity out there for buyers because the housing market has slowed down. And at the same time, you have a lot of sellers out there still willing to pay compensation. In fact, in the last 4 transactions that I've closed, I've kind of had a mix of how the compensation was paid. In one scenario, I had the buyer pay my entire compensation directly, whereas in another scenario, both the buyer and the seller split my compensation. And in the other 2 scenarios, the buyer requested that the seller pay my compensation and the seller negotiated it. We didn't come to original terms of what we had originally agreed to, but the seller did end up paying the compensation. And not only that, we ended up getting the properties for less than they were originally priced. And in my opinion, this is going to continue over the next couple of months. As we move closer to the end of the year, you're going to see homes sit on the market longer. You're also going to see more price reductions. But here's the thing, you're likely to see less inventory also coming to the market. In fact, over the next couple of weeks, you're likely to see the peak in inventory, which means more and more sellers are going to pull their homes off the market if they don't have to sell them. But that's not where you should focus your attention. You should focus your attention on those homes that are still actively listed, especially if you can find a home that checks all the boxes. Because if you can, in my opinion, that's a motivated seller. That's somebody that is looking to sell their home, possibly by the end of the year, because most people pull their homes off the market during the holiday season. They don't want people walking through them. They know it's a slower time of the year. They don't want days on the market adding up, so they instead just pull them off. And that's why you see inventory reach the lowest levels at the very end of the year. And while some things have been a little off this year with seasonal patterns, I don't expect that to be one of them. So if you're a seller out there on the market, just understand you need to price competitively. Otherwise, you risk sitting on the market. And buyers, you need to remain patient. If you can find the right property out there that checks all the boxes, that's currently sitting on the market, it makes sense, you can afford the payment, you got money in the bank, you got a longer term time horizon, then this could be the best opportunity to negotiate a deal in your favor. So with that said, if you're a buyer or seller in Orange County and you need representation, you would like someone to help, I would love to be that person to guide you through that process. I've been a real estate agent for 20 years in Orange County. I understand the market in detail, and I would love to help put my expertise to work for you.